Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this viewer's choice video I'll be discussing the consequences of a second Brexit referendum being called before we leave the EU. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please consider giving the like button a click as well as subscribing to the channel. That really helps. So when it comes to the consequences of holding another Brexit referendum, there is inevitably a certain amount of speculation, and my own views will also inevitably be coloured by my belief that it is the least worst option at this point. But I will be pointing to known facts when working through my reasoning. Before I begin though, I do need to explain what I mean by another Brexit referendum. This is because the way it's handled will obviously have an effect on the way it's received. So the problem with the referendum in 2016 is that people voted to leave the EU without knowing what that meant. And that's not being patronising. The issue is that the Brexiteers talked about full access to the single market, every single one of them, full access to the single market and all the other benefits of EU membership, but without having to be a member, follow its rules, and be able to conduct our own trade negotiations as if that was somehow a good thing. Of course, none of this is what they are arguing for now. So the Brexit that they proposed was demonstrably false, but the Remain groups were little better. They just spent their time attacking the Leave proposals rather than actually pointing out the benefits of membership. So it could be argued that a lot of people didn't really know what they were voting for, whether they voted Leave or Remain. The other issue with the referendum, apart from its illegality, is that people thought it was an instruction to Parliament. It was not. In law, public mandates are determined in a general election. That's it. End of story. A referendum is a wide-ranging opinion poll, just one that's run by the government and not a private company. But people didn't understand that because the UK doesn't really use referenda. At least it didn't until the pig fancier came along. So a second referendum run along the same lines would have the same problems. That's no good at all. The first thing that needs to change is that it must be binding. But how do you make a referendum binding? Parliament is sovereignty in our representative democracy. That's established in law. A referendum cannot override the will of Parliament. So there's only one way to make a referendum binding. Parliament has to vote through all the options on the ballot paper on the proviso that it's backed in the referendum. That way, when the results are announced, and assuming there are no legal challenges, the results are automatically implemented because Parliament has already passed the necessary legislation to do so. This was not the case in 2016. So what would be on the ballot paper? Well, there are a number of ways of doing it, and exactly how you do it depends on how reckless you're willing to be. The most responsible way to manage the referendum is to ask people one question with two responses. Do we leave the EU with the withdrawal agreement that has been agreed, or do we remain in the EU? Now, it'll be clear to people in that particular case who can be bothered to research that is what that means. To a point at least, the problem with the withdrawal agreement is that it doesn't tell us what the final arrangement will be, but we can thank the Conservative government for wasting 3 years without giving it a single thought for that. The downside to this version is that there are a lot of people who think they want to leave with no deal, that the deal is worse than remaining, even for Brexiteers. So such a referendum, though responsible in not pre-approving a massively destructive no-deal exit, would disenfranchise about a quarter of the voting public who will carry on believing that they've had democracy stolen from them. So an alternative might be to ask two questions. The first question would be a simple, do you wish to leave the EU or do you wish to remain a member? But then it has to go on to the second question, which is, if we do vote to leave, do you wish to leave under the withdrawal agreement or no agreement? Now, that would be irresponsible, as I say, but it wouldn't give those Brexit extremists any cause to complain, at least. There is also no danger in reality that this option would succeed. 100% of all Remain voters would either vote for the deal or abstain on that second question, but that would be foolish. And you'd have about half of the Leave voters who would also vote for the deal as well. So that would be my suggestion. So finally, on to the actual consequences. Now, reasonable people on both sides of the debate know that we're getting nowhere as we are. A general election could possibly shake things up and get us moving on the issue, but polls consistently suggest that this is unlikely to be the case. Besides, on such a polarised issue, it could be argued that a general election only runs the risk of shifting the balance away from a given voter's position. So a public vote, pre-legislated by Parliament, would definitely break the deadlock, and so would have wide support. Hardline Brexiteers don't support it because they know the mathematics has shifted away from their favour, and they also know that regardless, you haven't got a majority who want no deal at all. If the balance really had shifted more towards leave, and especially a hard leave, they'd be delighted to issue another vote. So, the vote is issued. What then? The Brexiteers would have us believe it would be civil war. The country would be so outraged at the theft of democracy that they'd rise up and we'd have riots in every city. However, they also said this back in March. Remember those riots on April 1st, 2019? No, nor do I. There wasn't even much talk to mark the event of still being in the EU by the Brexit supporting newspapers. They just carried on as normal. Everyone carried on as normal. In fact, in the lead up, we had 1 million people marching for a public vote and 6 million signing a petition to revoke Article 50 altogether. In response, Brexiteers managed to amass a few 100,000 petition signatures, and Nigel Farage managed to empty a pub to follow him on a bus. Well, that is until the spectacle became so sad that he abandoned them to his own march. So the greater feeling in terms of protesting is clearly in favour of remaining. When I pointed this out, Brexit supporters said that they didn't need to protest because we were leaving on March 31st. Well, it's now July 17th and we still haven't left, and they still haven't protested. There's also growing belief that we will still be in the EU on November the 1st. There still won't be any major protests. Oh sure, there'll still be a lot of people who want us to leave, and they will chunter and froth when we don't. They'll also turn out and put a tick in a box next to the most outlandish political terrorist that they have access to at a polling station. But beyond walking down to the end of their road with a pencil in hand, there has been zero demonstration in this country that any significant body of people can be bothered to protest further in vote for leave. Now, at this point, it would seem that a public vote would therefore be fine. The result would be right this time and everything will sort itself out. No, that's not what I'm arguing either. Sure, there won't be mass protests if Brexit is abandoned due to another referendum, but it won't stop the hardliners going nuclear in their response. And remember, that includes a massive section of the media. Society is divided, and concluding Brexit, whichever way, will do nothing to ease that. Only time will do that if Remain is chosen, as the bulk of Brexiteers are elderly. It's an unfortunate fact that the only thing that will hold up a mirror to what Leave supporters are actually supporting is to leave, and leaving without a deal at that. It is one reason why some support this outcome, even while they oppose the notion of Brexit. It will force the UK to face up to the fact that it is no longer a grand global empire. It is a wet and windy island with an unhealthy obsession with sheep. After a few years, we will be suitably chastened and come back to the world a more humble nation. And that thinking's fine, except of course that it will result in the deaths of many of the most vulnerable in our society, and the destruction of the UK as Ireland reunifies, though that's likely to at some point anyway, and Scotland leaves to become an independent nation. Maybe Wales will stick around, who knows? Whatever happens, our cricket team is knackered. But without leaving in a no-deal scenario, there will be no final defeat of the Brexit rhetoric. It will continue to poison our society. But if we imagine the UK as a person, not leaving is like having daily migraines that we can't control. But leaving with no deal is like curing the problem by amputating the head. Sure, it sorts the problem out, but it's not really worth the cost. So those are my views on the outcome of a second referendum. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please check out the Patreon link where you can find out the exclusives available to patrons. And until next time, I'll see you later.